Hey everyone. So today I am here with Katrina de la Cruz, who is my ENFJ Biffle. And yeah, we've actually learned a lot about the opposite functions from each other. I guess because we have similar backgrounds as like Asian American women living in LA. We have some similarities that I haven't encountered with other people, and yet we are also so different. We've learned so much from each other. So yeah, today our topic is going to be about the givens that FE users and FI users are blind to when they're communicating. And what do I mean by givens? Basically, we operate off of assumptions that we live our lives by that we assume everyone else does. Like basically it's from the phrase that it's a given that blah blah blah. And what I found is when people say it's a given that, most of the time you can actually test to see if they actually were operating off of that given or not. And so Kat and I are going to be very candid today about the givens that we operate off and learn from each other, and also what fascinates us about the other set of givens. So yeah. Anyways, so should we start with FE, like your givens or my givens? Whose givens should we start with?
Yeah, let's start with my givens as an FE Dom ENFJ. And it's really interesting now that I have this conversation because I almost have to, like, we've been friends for almost 2 years now, and we've just that's nearly 2 years of us just constantly reassessing the givens with each other. So I almost have these moments where I'm like, oh, I used to believe this thing, or I used to see the world this way, and I no longer do. So I actually have to revert back to past Kat, pre-Crystal Kat.
Yes, there is a before Crystal and an after Crystal, and I guess there is a before Cat after Cat for me too. So yeah.
But so my givens before, or still now to a degree, definitely assuming my responsibility of the emotional environment and thinking that everyone had that same capacity within themselves to experience the social and emotional environment as with as much awareness and acuity as I experience it. So for example, if something was happening between people and I picked up that this micro expression or behavior was off, then I'd be like, why isn't so and so picking up on that? Or why are they out of touch? How could they be so
like when people don't pick up on social cues and you're just like, oh my gosh, it's so weird how this dynamic is running amok, and they aren't realizing that
exactly
uncomfortable.
Right. And I realized part of that is then I would jump into these situations where it's oh my gosh, they're not picking up on it, so I'm the only one who picks up on it, and I have to go act out the thing and make this emotionally harmonious. And I think that alludes to the second given, which is people want to always be happy, or people are always seeking this people
aren't always wanting to be happy. I'm already laughing because people don't always want to be happy. Especially if they're FI users. They're like, there's peace.
Yeah. And then I think there's another given in that, which is that people essentially are not responsible for their own emotions. Not only that I'm responsible for them, but just kind of forgetting that as for example, an FI user would just they don't need to be told that their emotions can hold space. They are aware of that, or just recognizing if someone goes off, if there's a rift between me and someone else and they go off to handle it emotionally on their own, I would freak out and be like, how could you, what, I need to be responsible for this, or I need to we need to co-harmonize as opposed to you handling your emotions by yourself.
Yeah. So when you say someone is responsible for their own emotions, what does that mean to you? Because I'm really aware that I think that means something different and that looks different for an FE user versus an FI user. So you can define that a little further.
Well, I think for example, if I saw someone hurt in front of me, someone was visibly distressed, it would be very hard for me to resist intervening or saying coddling, saying something, oh, are you okay? Or switching my demeanor to to take care of them, or to affect that like they're like a freaking their distress is my magnet, and I'm like a freaking bulldozer or like a whatever, I don't know, something that just like another magnet that's just attracted to that distress and needs to like make it not distressed.
I find that so interesting because it's like when you say you're responsible for your own emotions, like when I hear that, even though I know like you mean something different, as an FI user, my default is to be like, oh, like, but if they were responsible for their own emotions, wouldn't that mean that they would have to go take care of it themselves? And you wouldn't have to. So it's like paradoxical.
Yeah, that is like actually a strain in my brain to like have to push the brakes and be like, no, they are responsible for themselves. Because it almost feels, I mean, it almost, it's an ego thing, right? It's like I'm assuming my importance in this like distressful situation.
What I think it is actually is FE users view themselves as responsible for maintaining, and I'm taking off the like the what possessiveness, like the possessive pronoun, whatever. They're responsible for emotions, period. If there are emotions floating around, they're not even thinking of, are those their emotions or mine?
Exactly.
There's rising up to do it. And I think it's like also at the same time, F users are very good at like, I'm responsible for my own emotions. If they put in the possessor there, they'll be like, I have to say and volunteer all emotions and such.
Yes.
And I think
Yeah.
as an FI user, it's like, well, I have my emotions, you have yours. And if I care enough to go out of my way to help your emotions, I'm still aware of my emotions as separate. But now it's like, oh, your emotions are affecting my emotions because I care about you. But there's like this disconnect of like, there's a choice involved. I don't have to go out of my way to like go and help you, but I will because I want to, because I have free will and I'm a good person and yada yada. And on the other hand, I feel like I am not responsible for my own emotions in that I can't control if other people might react poorly if I choose to share my emotions. Therefore, I often feel like I have no choice but to keep them to myself if I feel like there will be a graver consequence of me sharing them. And so I think it's interesting because I think I inherently view responsibility as like asterisk, asterisk. Well, if this condition, then this. But if this condition, then this. And this and this. There's like so many more like exceptions that interplay for me. And I think for FE, it's more like sadness, fix it. Sadness, fix it. Whose sadness is it? Fix it. And they can like kind of get lost in that. But at the same time, I feel like sometimes I'm really reluctant to actually give a shit when I should to some degree. And people don't see that side of me as often, but like there's definitely this like almost sociopathic apathy that I can get to where I'm just like, I don't care if you're sad, like I'm not going to do anything about it. And that's the dark side of FI that people don't always talk about, is that we can very well be hands off to the emotional environment to maybe a like really rude and damaging degree that we can't see. But for FE, they can be like so controlling of the emotional environment to where it gets suffocating. So it's like completely opposite sorts of issues that can surface, like negligence versus suffocation.
There's this, it reminded me of this time we were texting, and I remember being like, wow, FI users have such great emotional boundaries. Like they probably see and feel the emotional environment, but then like they're so good at putting that blocker. And then we had this conversation, and then there was like this dawning moment where it's like, oh, there's a difference between that, like feeling the emotional environment as intensely as I feel it, and then putting a block up versus like actually not feeling it at all. It's like you actually don't have to put as much effort into blocking something you don't feel.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And I know I can already hear all the people that will be like, hey, wait a minute, I feel emotional environments, INFPs. And what I will say is, I don't actually think we experience emotional environments. I think we experience like the thought parallel of that. Like we experience hearing people's thoughts and those lead to emotions. And I think like an FE user can like see the feelings and like lead to like understanding maybe what the TI of like what someone is thinking is. But I think that when NFPs do feel like there's some energy of other people coming into them, it's not always the same as what FE is experiencing. Because I certainly, while I'm blocked off to what other people feel, I'm not blocked off to what like other people are thinking. So if someone's like judging me, I will feel like an intense sort of exchange happening. Or like if someone is like being really cringy and someone's like making fun of them almost in their heads, like I'll feel like I have to do something about it. But like if it's just like, oh, they're like so taken aback and surprised, I don't feel responsible for making sure that you feel better. Like it's like my gauge of what even is a negative stimulus that I need to take care of is completely opposite. So I
Yeah.
learned that too about FENTI and FITE.
Yeah. And on the flip side with the whole TI piece, I remember earliest conversations like me stating the ease at which I can say like believe what you want to believe and I'll believe what I want to believe and let's create that separation. Like I don't feel as bullied by emotions as I feel about thoughts. Like thoughts
Yeah,
are very
definitely.
I just had this whole conversation with a friend, like a TE dumb, where I knew like I need to come into this conversation with like I already know what I've decided on. I already know what I think. I already know my opinions. Like that's not changing. I'm not coming into this to be like to have my mind changed in any way or be affected.
Versus I feel like my mind is always changing about everything. Like I'm like, I think that this is true. Wait, no, I don't anymore. And I don't think FENTI experiences that nearly at the same rate. Or if they think they do, they can like tune into like what they really think and be like, actually, yeah, you're right. I don't actually like my mind's not changed.
And I love that there's that parallel though, because like when you say these things like, oh, emotionally, like I can actually just numb out or just feel unaffected by the emotional environment. And that's a choice. Like the given before we like met and had all these conversations was like, and it's terrible. Like I would think that that type of behavior was inherently selfish or something like that. But I think favorite things about punches is like, not good or bad. Everyone just has different reality that they're inhabiting. And when we can bridge that gap and actually just understand, like put ourselves literally under other people's shoes because we're drawing these parallels of trying to fit this like just put the puzzle piece together that everyone is inhabiting essentially a different reality because everyone has a different brain. It's so important. So like granted I'm learning how that whole like FI how to experience FI in the way you experience it. But when I do that whole parallel with PI where it's like, oh, it's so easy for me to be like, I have my opinions. They stand alone for me. They're part of my identity. Like they're not going to shift based off of like needing consensus.
Definitely.
Like, when I think about it that way, yeah, it feels so much more like less foreign.
Yeah, like I feel like it's like what I've noticed about NFJs especially is like they will have conviction in how they're going to show up regardless of how they feel. And the conviction is like this underpinning philosophy that I don't think people often can pick up about them if they're not an FETI user, but I've kind of learned how to. And to put it into words, like despite like blah blah blah, I'm still going to do blah blah blah. Like it's very much like, oh, I'm so sad right now. Well, I'm still gonna do what I think is best and do what aligns with my overarching philosophy of like how people should be treated or how life should be lived. And like it can sound generic and the kind of general when you ask them what it is, but if you can actually prompt them to go deeper into why they do what they do, why they believe what they believe, there's actually a lot of thought put into it. I think a lot of it is like NFPs will see, and there's like the legendary pairing of ENFJ and INFP is the INFP will get like turned off by how the ENFJ is so assertive with their emotions and be like, that's so irresponsible. And the ENFJ will be like, why is the INFP so afraid of me? And I think what it is like for an NFP by default, they'll be like, oh, like you're just readily being enthusiastic and really nice right off the bat. You don't seem to give anything to hide. I'm like suspicious of it. I think the NFJ is like, if I feel positive emotion, life is short. I'm going to share it. I'm not going to like do this whole like, oh, like is this going to like, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like they're going to just do what they're going to do. And I think for me, because my TE is what's fluid, even if my FI isn't, even if I like someone, I'm going to be like, well, I'm only going to show as much as I feel safe showing because I don't know if they're going to do something that's going to make me feel suddenly really sad or whatever. And it's mostly because my TE interpretation of like, do they even care about me back is always changing, even if I know that I always care about them. And so for an NFJ, it's like the inverse, where if someone says they like you, I feel like it seems like you guys consider more like whether you be compatible. And then for me, I'm like, oh, I already decided if I liked you or not like ages ago or something. And it's so different. My FETI is still like, I'm going to communicate what is going on regardless of like if that person's feelings are hurt. It's still like my principle to still give them something to latch off to, like let them know what's going on. And I'm like, I don't owe you anything. I don't want to let you know what's going on if I'm going to be hurt by. And so there's like such a difference in that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I feel like on that principle piece, especially for me in particular, like I feel so strongly about like the need to communicate. Like I hate this. I realize like it's a very TI thing at this point where like the idea of other people being misunderstood, and to really live by that principle of like communication and understanding, like it leans on the FE like in me to like talk about my emotions, to share that willingly. And like there's a really funny video done by I forgot his name, the YouTuber James, INFJ.
Frank James.
Yeah. Where, oh no, it's not. I can't remember. I'm sorry. I'm mixing up people. But someone did like a meme Myers-Briggs thing where like the ENFJ caricature was on a date and was just willingly giving all her emotions, and was like, why isn't everyone as open? Why isn't like anyone as open as I am? Like it's so easy. And like I just scoffed at it, and I'm like, damn, it's a mirror. I see myself in it. It is so funny.
I don't like
it. It's so true. Like I have the We're Not Really Strangers like game. I'm like ready and willing to play with anyone. And that's like also one of those givens. It's like not everyone wants to give their emotional, like they don't want to give their emotions as readily as I do. And I'm just like a freaking puppy in that regard. And I really have to pump the brakes sometimes and be like, just, okay, it's a slow layers, slow peeling. Not everyone wants to jump into like meeting someone for the first time and be like, this is what my,
which is so funny because you guys talk about it in a puppy way, but when you're actually there, you can seem more chilled and like this archetype of like how like an ENFP or ESFP will just be like blah 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 blah. This is me, and then I think ENFJs can be more like, hey, like let's have a convo, but it's not going to be like yeah. And I feel like people sometimes mistake an ENFP for an ENFJ or something because we are both enthusiastic during like group conversations, but it's like not the same internal process. Because for me, I'd say like if I'm being really, really honest with myself, I'm like not actually looking to connect that often. I'm more so trying to gain some sort of like fascination about the world that's completely self-centered and like about how people are all a reflection of a greater lesson I'm trying to learn, but not necessarily trying to like make all these new friends. I used to think I was there to make friends, and now I'm just like, I don't think that's ever the real purpose of it, because I'm pretty good at like at this point in my life moving on from like friends I've grown distant from, or like just friends I don't feel interested in anymore. And that's the legendary like ENFPs are all flaky, ENFJs are all clingy, like those stereotypes people say, but I don't think they actually understand that like it doesn't look cut and dry like in the real world and stuff. And so it's actually interesting because I used to be like, oh, like I want to connect too, I'm a puppy, and I was like, actually I'm not a puppy. And that took me a long time. I thought it was a given that of course I'd want to connect, but now I'm realizing what that actually means in practice from an FETI lens. It's about like sharing life and sharing like, what is it actually? Like, can you actually explain to me what it is that is gained from this connection? Because it's not that I don't value an adjacent sort of connection, but it's definitely not the same. So I'm just like losing steam trying to explain what exactly. It's so different.
I think the best way, like we've had these conversations with the analogy of like here's two people and there's something between those two people that is being birthed and like grown together, and
like a third entity.
Yes, the third entity. And sometimes I imagine it like a little fire that two people are like burning and trying to like,
oh my god,
together.
That's like so cute.
Like a plant that they are like growing together, and there is an appeal of this like shared experience of like this building this third entity together. And the other analogy that we've used before is like, okay, in Sims, where there's the social bar that goes up and down based off of how much you've interacted with someone, like that's very much the way I experience my relationships with people. If I feel like we've been doing a lot of the social and emotional pieces, and then our bar is like all green and full, and then like if we haven't spoken, then it decreases. And I imagine that as like also a third entity, like as if we share this bar, like if they don't talk to me, that goes down. If I don't talk to them, it goes down. Like, and my whole life as a freaking FE Dom ENFJ is like just seeing these relationships and trying to keep that bar, that green bar, as high as possible, or trying to keep that fire like as warm and as ablaze as possible. Very
Wow.
on a default mode, like not even asking myself, like, do I want this fire to be between these two people to like be burning? Do I want to have this plant with this person? It's just by default a person. Oh, I am now like in this pull of keeping this alive to whatever degree. And I don't know if it's like a TI or FI thing, but it's definitely a growth point. Mirroring what you were saying is like recognizing my own skin in the game for these relationships. Like, do I actually am very selective about the people that I bring into my life. It's not this puppy dog. Like I go like to every freaking person and like lap for their, like try to get their attention. It's like a very, I actually had to like bring it into my consciousness to realize like, oh my gosh, I do have like criteria for people. Oh shit, like that's not a bad thing. But I think that's like the point you're making too, right? Is like it's not this like surface level understanding of just like someone who's sort of passing their friendship out to every single.
So you would say though that like when you're in a sort of relationship of any sort, friendship, romantic, that you're not like keeping score of who's done more and who's not, right? Because I think TE and FI users do that. And I think that people who mistype themselves as using FE don't often realize that FE is like truly, it can be selfless. And when I say selfless, I mean like without self, as in you're just thinking, keep the fire going. You're not thinking, you're like pouring less kindling than me, so I'm gonna like withdraw a bit because you need to like equalize it. I think TEFI just definitely keep score of that stuff a lot more.
I see there's something that's parallel, but I definitely feel like it's a different sort of translation of it, where it's like I'm looking for evidence of warmth constantly, and it's not this like very true or false like coin in a bucket point system. It's like, okay, for example, one really big thing about myself is if I send you like a paragraph text, and then like you send me like a 1-word response, I'm not like tit for tat being like,
there's only 1 word here and I gave you 10 words or something.
It's more like I just get really self-conscious about that, because then it's like, are we both as invested in this fire as I am? And I really have to like, because like I think the underlying part there is like the way that I interpret social scenarios. That is also a huge given that I've had a conversation with other FE users about. It's like, what are the social constructs that we view as givens? For example, like my given is like, if I send a paragraph text, like, so it is socially appropriate to send a paragraph text back, and if you don't send a paragraph text back, then it means you hate me. Like I have to, or like you put a freaking period after like a sentence, it changes the tone really intensely. And so it's like, I don't know if it's the same, like I'm looking for more of these like qualitative pieces, like tone, voice, behavior.
Yeah, because I have an ENTJ friend who really racks up like, oh, did they do this enough? But it's much more general. It's more like, if I keep initiating, then it means something, as opposed to like literally like, oh, like if they're sending me a 1-word response, maybe there's some kind of emotion that's fueling that. I wonder what it is that's happened recently that's making it. That's like FE, I think. And FITE is more like, oh, like if I'm initiating more, then the power dynamic is in your favor because I'm the one who cares more. And then it becomes like this hurt, like I don't want to be the one that cares more. FE is more like, okay, it's kind of like, what do they do with the information going forth? It's more like, okay, like if there's less warmth here because you're sending me less responses, I want to have a constructive conversation about this and try to figure out what emotion's constricting you, which is what I think would do. I think TNFI is more like, should I just withdraw more to make this person like desire me more, or like to be more independent or something? Because we think of it as like, I have my separate emotions, but you have your separate emotions. And at any time, they could be completely unequal. It's like individual bars. And if my bar is like too much higher than yours, I'm going to feel shitty. But if your bar is too much higher, I'm also going to feel shitty, as opposed to it's a mutual bar that's shared.
Yeah, like co-responsibility over this bar. Like that's a really distinct thing. Yeah, because we've had this conversation in the past too of that immediate question in every scenario that I'm always asking is, what is this person's emotional environment? By default, I think that where someone does something and I'm thinking like, what is the emotional context for them that influenced that behavior? I don't readily sort of judge people without trying to take that into consideration.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're not like, oh, if their emotional environment means they don't care about me anymore, then I'm going to be sad, and so I need to leave first. Like this idea of like, I'm going to beat you to the breakup or something is definitely
no,
like,
yeah, it's like my response to like me sending a paragraph and I get a one-word text is like, can we have a conversation about this? Like, is there something misunderstood?
exactly.
Here?
It's much more like assertive. It's like, hey, like let's like talk this out. And I think for me, if I was noticing someone withdrawing, I'd be like freaked out and be like, oh no, like should I withdraw to give them space now for them to like figure out that they like me again? My default is to not talk about it. My default is to be like, let me like strategize and conflict resolve on my own and such.
Okay, wait, that sorry. Okay, wait. First, to summarize what we're talking about, it's kind of like the difference between FEs, like let's recalibrate, versus what you're saying FI is like,
let's like leave. I'm kidding. It's not like, okay, but kind of. It's like, let's run away from this.
There's always the opportunity for this like negotiation of emotion, dance, back and forth communication.
Yeah,
in my
very
brain.
much so. Yeah. Oh yeah, and just disclaimer for anyone who's listening is like, I recognize that like, you know, there are FI users I've met who can react in a way similar to what I'm describing, and there are FI users who have done what Cat can do. So I'm not saying that this is across the board like, oh, if you are FI, therefore it has to be this way. But I will say that like it's more common that these are the default instincts of, I think, the judging functions, especially if they're like masculine ones. So
yeah. Okay. And so the reason I started to get really riled up when you said about conflict, the part about conflict resolution, so it actually, I'm curious to know if like other ENFJs or NFJs like feel this as strongly about this, but because on principle, I believe in like communication and understanding and like seeking that, this idea of someone like resolving a conflict between two people but on their own drives me off a cliff.
Why do you think it grinds your gears so much?
Because I'm like, how? Because it's one, it's like how can you this conflict involves two people. You can't just negate one person and expect to resolve it with one-sidedness, because you're missing 50% of the information that's necessary to resolve this conflict. Because as one person, let's say you make a decision that's based off of your own experience of the conflict, but you're not factoring in the other person's experience of the conflict. Maybe that's a solution for you, but not a solution for them. And that's just so almost like infuriating for me, because it's like, how can you cut one person entirely out of a relationship, like, and solve a problem? It's very okay, sorry if it triggers anyone, but it's like very, I view it egotistically, or maybe I just need to understand it better. Like, explain to me the givens.
It seems egoic. How about that? It's not ego. I like egoic. Like it's centered around the ego, not, oh, your ego is so large. But it's also I guess I feel like people conflict resolve, and I can't speak for like maybe the gammas, the SFPs and NTJs, because I don't know how FI functions for them, but at least for like NFPs like myself and perhaps some STJs, we very much operate off of this idea of like, unless someone has explicitly told us like their thoughts or feelings or ideologies, we don't like default to trusting people. Like we default to assuming everyone is going to lie to protect their feelings and is just mistrustful. And so for us, we look at what is at stake here, and we just kind of assume that other people aren't going to really care or notice, or are as invested as we are if we retreat in a relationship. Because if we see them retreating, we're already reacting to that. We're like, oh, like if they're retreating, what do they want me to do? And we don't assume that we assume that asking will create perhaps even further annoyance or something. And a lot of us, I don't really know where we got this from, but I think it prints deeply honest that someone in our lives has probably done this to us before, and that now is like how we read every single interaction. And I really until honestly the last 2 years did not assume that people actually wanted to know how I was feeling and would respond in any way other than, well, that's your problem or something. Like, that's your problem, I think, was a huge narrative I was fed as a younger kid with friendships and at home and all this stuff. So I think it's very brave and noble that NFJs, they are so good at just asking for what they want, because they assume it's rational like that someone could look at them and assume, okay, I can see where you came to this conclusion of this is what I want. But for me, I assume that my desires aren't valid, and I assume my desires aren't something that people would actually want to hold space for. It's very different than like someone being like, oh, I empathize with you, versus I can see why you would think that this is what needs to be taken action on. So for me, it's a huge TI thing, at least with like weak TI.
On the flip side, actually, that made me realize, so as an ENFJ, with FE being the dominant function, like, okay, we want the emotional information. Just because you want the emotional information actually doesn't mean you have the best intentions behind that. It just means you are magnetized towards the like needing the emotional information.
Exactly. Yes, yeah.
So that's the point. And like for me, sometimes if there is no emotional information that's given to me, I will make assumptions to fill in that emotional information, because it's what I lean on the most to like make decisions, essentially. But I think that a big thing is being able to hear that emotional information. And like, it's the same thing that I experienced just before this call with an ENTJ friend of mine who like, we were problem solving for something. And then like, he told me he tried to like put himself in my shoes to solve a problem for me, which I didn't, like, he wasn't really factoring in like my experience of the problem and like my objective, which was really funny. We had this great like feedback discussion, but it's the same thing I realized with FE, where it's like, I can solicit your emotional information, but if I'm also not respecting like your FI and all that, like that's moot point. That's not helpful either. Just because you solicit the emotional information, you have to like really try to understand like the values of the individual emotionally. And like not like you said earlier, like what if you need that space to muse on like sad feelings, or it's not, what I'm trying to say is like, it is actually false to solicit the emotional information and then like default try to fix their emotions for them.
Yeah, because like a lot of my emotions aren't generated from external stimuli a lot of the time. Like, to be honest, I've recognized recently that like for a lot of friends and just I guess maybe relationship potential significant other types, like I can seem like I retreat a lot and I don't even notice it, because if I'm upset about something else in my life, then it's going to affect literally how I interact with every single person. Like, it's like one blip in the radar is going to like the entire system's going to be down, like, or something. And so I might like retreat from like all of my friends at once, even if it has nothing to do with the actual relationship itself with all these individual friends. Like, I've had like eras in my life. I say eras because they really just feel like time periods where like I didn't want to talk to like anyone, even though I'm a huge extrovert. And if I did talk to anyone, it wasn't going to be about anything super personal, because I didn't feel like anyone understood me. And I think like I've just like really, in a lot of NFPs, I've just always lived life really feeling like when your emotions are generated from stuff that isn't like relevant to what's happening like immediately, then you can't really expect people to do anything about it, because it's like what, like if I'm like grieving a breakup, I'm not going to feel better just from talking to my friends. I'm gonna feel better that person comes over and apologizes to me. Or it's kind of like the thing I want is very specific and often not from the person who wants to problem solve for me. Because I feel like like it's like for FI users, it's like, well, you can't fix my emotion. If the emotion for FI users is so specific, the solution is specific.
Exactly.
And I feel like for FE, it sometimes seems like the emotion won't be necessarily very specific. It can be very general, where anyone can make you feel better to some degree just by keeping you company. But for me, it's not that way.
That totally makes sense. And I love this parallel of what I just experienced with the ENTJ friend of mine, where I've learned from past ways that he's given me feedback, where it's like, I don't need to do this TE thing. Like, I need to come to him with very specific problems.
Yeah, very specific objective.
Yes.
Yeah, specific.
Because I don't want this generic, like he's gonna try to solve all the problems.
Yeah, like you ask for feedback on one specific thing, and to give feedback on the whole thing. It's like, no, I want this one specific thing.
Yeah, because it actually crosses, like I remember getting this like feedback from him, this very TE feedback of like, I'm just gonna put myself in your shoes entirely and solve it the way that I would have solved it, like where it completely bulldozed over my TI and like the way that I was already thinking about something. And I remember feeling that boundary cross like so intensely, and it rubbed me the wrong way. But we've had feedback about this and like learned from each other, which is wonderful. But like knowing that experience and flipping that, but on the realm of feelings, is really insightful for me right now, because then it's like, oh shit, me as the FE dom, like coming in being like, I'm here to save the day. And like, I mean, it's almost like, okay, this sounds really terrible, but like, you know, when there's like volunteer trips to certain countries and like not even considering like the specifics of the scenario, just thinking it's actually about, it's very egotistical as a TE or FE user, like coming in and doing this
like
FE work.
Like I'm like, am I gonna like this? Am I gonna regret doing this? Like who's gonna be there? Tell me. Like I need so much information. And it's funny because like I don't ask it necessarily, but I'm always like calculating every single like, is my love happiness bucket going to go up or down if I do this thing? And I hate when I don't know if people do that, but yeah, like I just feel like when FE users are like offended if I don't go to them specifically for something specific, and I'm just like, because one person can't be your everything, and I know that because like I segmentally have different friends for different purposes, which is also I think being just an any user, because I know ENTPs that relate to that too. But like I think like I just don't want to put the burden on someone who might feel worse if I try to go to them and I know that it's not going to work already, and they don't know that, and when they are shown that, they're like upset that they couldn't help me, and I'm just like, then I feel like a burden. I don't want to be that. I think a lot of my FI experience is that I also have a lot of givens about like being a burden. Like I assume other people feel as easily burdened as I do, and so that I don't want to give that back to them. But then when I realized if users actually don't feel that burden in the same way, I was like, oh, what? That's so interesting.
Can you expand on that?
The burden thing? Yeah, so basically I feel like if I share emotions and someone sees, I assume someone can see that the solution for my problem does not lie with them, and then I assume that they would get annoyed at that, because that is kind of what FI users do to each other. Like if someone, I don't know, like if someone came to an FI user and they were just venting and they were like, I just wish so-and-so just do this thing. It's like, then just like, they would just be like, why are you telling me? Like, they'd be like, okay. I think that there's like, I assume people will judge whether I have the right to have the problem I do and not validate the grounds with which I came to have this problem, which it was like really game changing for me when I realized that if you have FE and TI, you can see how I got myself in the situation I did pretty well, especially if you're like an NFJ. Like I didn't normally realize that people can empathize with my thinking patterns because they're so ungrounded. And so like I will then feel like if someone is trying to give me advice and it's not hitting the spot, then they'll get annoyed very quickly. And I really hate that feeling because that used to happen to me a lot. And so I feel like I associate being a burden with coming to someone for something that they can't give, and then feeling trapped in trying to give you something that's not going to work, and then feeling annoyed or bad about it or something.
Gotcha. Yes. So the parallel with the thinking piece is like the fact that like I didn't want to repeat this experience with my ENTJ friend in which my TI got bulldozed over. And I knew I needed to give him the feedback, or else it would just be this repeated pattern of him thinking he's helping me, but he's really not. And it actually just keeps making things worse.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't want to repeat a pattern where I tell my problem, and what I really need is to feel like someone else has been there before. And if someone doesn't know what to say but says something generic, it makes me feel worse. And then like watching me get upset about that. Yeah, this happens a lot.
Bad cycle. And what's really interesting about our friendship is because I think that, like, granted, I may have not experienced things exactly as you have, but I on a TI like level, I'm able to draw as much parallel as I possibly can, and I think that's something that has like really helped our friendship a lot.
It has, yes. I feel like I can say something and you're pretty, like, I feel like you don't do what honestly a lot of other ENFJs in my life do, where you like refer very generically. You actually try to refer back to yourself, and you go, okay, I can't use FI, I got TI, and you like reach into that and you go, does the experience you're saying relate to how I experience this thing through TI, like even what you're doing now. I'm like, yes. And you're like relating to that. And that's like very comforting because like, it's not like I want someone to literally have been where I am, but someone to resonate with having an adjacent experience, like of some like weight. And I think that like honestly, like I haven't really seen a lot of ENFJs do this, which is why I think our friendship is so interesting. Because like I don't know, like I've spent so much time in the community. I've been studying type for like almost 8 years now, and I still haven't quite met someone like you. So that's cool.
Before Crystal, Dwana, and Kat.
I know, right? Yeah.
And this goes back to like the theme with the givens, is because I used to think that everyone wanted the sugar coaty, like let's make everything feel good, even when bringing like specific problems. It actually was something I had to relearn with our friendship very specifically, that like one, people want my TE, like they want my ability to problem solve and think about something like in a non-emotional way, and that's actually very helpful. But two, that like I used to think that like me bringing myself into a conversation with someone like was I don't know if selfish is the right word, but I just thought it was unhelpful, because like, oh, if someone's hurt, then they emotionally want it to be all about themselves and like the coddling piece. I guess some people want that. I realize like other FE users might want that.
Yeah, I hate that. I'm like, I am my best. Like, I am my best resource. If you don't want to use me for me, then don't talk to me. Is like how I feel.
But then I realized like with you, and it's so refreshing actually. Like I love the fact that I get to challenge that given that I am so intrigued by just the differences between people. And it is actually very, very, very fascinating. The way I am your friend is a very different way from the way that I am like my ENTJ's friend, from the way that I am my INFJ's friend. Like, granted, I'm not using them as archetypes. I'm using them as specific people, but using their like type to make them anonymous. So I'm not saying like I treat all INFJs the same way. But like the point is, I just think it's fascinating. It's a fascinating way to show up in life, and an exercise to do, to just like learn people where they are at. And it's truly like it satisfies my FE-TI on like such a deep level, because like TI I'm so curious about people, but like FE I want to like reach the best emotional, like on a relationship level, I want us to have like the most robust flame. And I'm learning that like you don't get the most robust flame by like pouring kerosene on every single fire, or like not every third entity plant between people needs the same, like every third entity plant between people like needs something different. And that actually makes me so excited about like people in life in general.
Yeah, and like I've become more excited in a way
like
that
everyone has their own
possible. Yeah, like I feel like I knew type, right? I was like, yeah, whatever. And I've even like, like through fighting with NFJs, like learned so much about like how they work. But then like with you, it's like actually exciting because you excite me about like the prospect of using FE as opposed to you should do it this way. It's like, but Crystal, what if someone needs I'm like, what if someone needs this? Like I've had to actually challenge how unworthy I feel all the time because you're here. Like, what if you're wrong about your conviction that you're alone? Like you've like very directly said that.
Yeah, dude, if there's anything I live on this planet for, it's like all the loners in the world. I'm like, you're not like, release that conviction that you're like so misunderstood. Stop it.
I know, and like saying you're not alone isn't enough to make us feel that, but like when you've reasoned this, I just love how I can boil down what I feel and think to like this principle I'm missing. Like, for example, I was going through a breakup with an ENFJ and I went to you and I was like, do you think he misses me? And you're like, of course. And I was like, but why do people miss each other? And then you're like, pushes up glasses. Well, you see, there was a co-created relationship between you two. It wasn't just a one-sided experience. It was a two-sided experience. Therefore, it is like, and you were just like so patient with like breaking down this idea of like, people like, don't experience reality like, and it's not just like your reality and everything else is just like a black hole, which is often how I feel because I like look at someone's facial expressions. I'm like, what the crap are they feeling? And like the idea of like having conviction in someone is feeling something that can be logically reasoned, talked about, or even accepted as a valid reaction to have was very powerful, because I kind of assumed that, like, I guess like in middle school when I had like crushes on boys and like I would like say how I felt and they like ran away from it or tattled on me to the teacher, I kind of still feel like that's going to happen to me, where someone's going to be like, you shouldn't feel or do, or yeah, or like whatnot. And I think that this idea of like it could be different, because there are so many successful relationships operating in the world right now, that what's fueling them, this principle that they both believe in. And I think that meeting someone who is so pure-hearted and believes in this principle so much, rather than just hearing it recited to me like a textbook from like typology threads, or even my friends who are like honestly a little more jaded and haven't even had this like very pure like set of FE experiences, where I think you have been good at conflict resolving more than most people I've met. I'm just like, okay, like I can learn something here. Like I was very like kind of like in my own little world prior to that. And I think like I just really learned, like, when you don't have TI, how much of the world feels like it's going to just flare up against you. And it was like through this, I was like, oh, like if I can just reconfigure how I see things, or what to believe in, or what to commit to despite my feelings, then I can actually tap into my free will and my power. And so this is how you're supposed to like back off a bit. I'm supposed to step up a bit and be like, yeah, like I can like have these like fulfilling relationships, or like know how to communicate in a way. And like I think the most powerful thing I've witnessed for you as an ENFJ is like when you say something and then someone says something back, you actually, it churns and goes into like a system, which is TI. And I did not really realize that that was what could happen, because when I say how I feel and someone that responds and it doesn't add up to what I was thinking, then it like throws me off. And I was so afraid of that feeling for so long. But now that I have you as a friend and so many others, I'm like, okay, like I can like go and take this and be like, what does this mean? What do I do with this and stuff? And that's okay to like have this slower reaction to trying to like wrap my head around other people's emotional response to me that they're saying to me in real time.
First off, thank you. I love our friendship so much. And second of all, like parallel to that, in what you learned from, like, there's this whole thing that I'm so passionate about, is just learning through embodiment. Just like there's so many things that you just can't learn in a textbook. You can only learn it through like a friendship in which someone embodies something and is willing to experience and stimulate that reality, that new reality, that new way of being. For example, on your end, it's been like, okay, I don't believe in conflict resolution because it leads to something negative, versus like in our friendship, or the way that I've like tried to like have our conversations together, or model that there's this like conflict resolution is real and it can happen, and you can have a problem and then come out of it in a better way because of FETI, like sharing your perspective, being convicted in that, but also like maneuvering the emotional environment. But on the flip side, for me, what I learned from you is definitely like also in an SI piece of like learning how to have boundaries as an individual, like and even just emotional boundaries as well. Like I think before anything I would have done that felt self-serving to my emotions or my values first was very foreign, and I just automatically put it into like the selfish bucket, which is just unhelpful, because it's not selfless, or it's not good or bad, it's just like a different mode of deciding, or
yes, exactly. Oh my god, wait, like you saying, oh, like me putting myself there self is just like me blanketing and being like, all reactions to my emotions are going to be negative. That's like the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So like everything I do is negative. If I do it inherently like for myself and not thinking about the needs of like the tribe, then it's negative. But that's not true. And I think like the biggest paradigm shift for me is, oh, if I have this objective for the tribe, like I don't think that's going to change. Like I will still always value the tribe to the degree that I do, because I've like been almost 27 of like having this brain. However, if I see the FI, like honoring the FI as like the route to that, like I need to know like what I value. I need to recognize how I feel, even at like even at like a really small minuscule scale, of being really conscious of like my boundaries, my sense of identity, and how that fits. Like I think you shocked me one time where you were reminding me that I am part of the emotional environment, and I was like, what? You know, like
no, I'm not.
Wait, this is what it is. Like my biggest fear is like, you know, I'm in this like a relationship where I'm emotionally invested, whether it's a parent or a sibling or a friend or a lover, and me saying like, oh, this is what I want, like this is what I want, and it's antithetical to the harmonious environment. And then my default is like, that's not going to be received well. That's like, no one is ever going to respond to that and say like, I respect your TI, I respect your identity, and I want you to be like happy because you are doing this like thing for yourself as opposed to the tribe, is very antithetical to my experience of like standing up for self in that way amidst tribe agony. It's still very important to me, like for me to do that and someone else to be like, oh, that was good.
I would be like, I think that's good. Like I told you about how like I literally had a friend breakup, like where the person deleted me from their life, but I was happy for them that in doing that they had released themselves from a relationship that was honestly too tiring for them, and now we're friends again. So it's like,
that's awesome. Yeah,
it's like, oh look, see, like processing time. I learned to take more responsibility for that relationship, and they learned to set more boundaries to not tire themselves out from overgiving to me.
Yeah. So, or this is a really good example that's like less big picture, but for example, like when we're on the phone, and like I just reminding myself that you actually care about like my own boundaries, and that if I said something like I'm really tired and I just can't keep going, I can't keep talking, you'd actually like want me to get off the phone, or you want me to like something like that, if that makes sense. Whereas like,
oh my god, yes,
the FE assumption is like, oh, I'm self-sacrificing, like I have to stay on the phone as long as I possibly can to like,
oh my god, yes. And that's the thing with givens, we martyr ourselves too in ways that we don't need to.
Exactly. That's
yes, which is I feel so dragged in a parallel way, because like right now I'm like trying to figure out like how to tell this person like how I feel that I'm like sort of dating, and I'm having issues with, for me, like it's not an FE harmonious environment, like the harmonious environment, it's more like, oh, like this person has expressed general disinterest in relationships, and like I don't really want to bring up the idea of like, you know, being an exception and changing that, because it feels like such a violation of someone's free will. But then my ENFP friend actually pointed out to me that like I'm in essence still people pleasing if I think that what the person wants from me is silence. So if I don't bring up how I feel, I'm actually still living a lie. I'm like,
damn, that's powerful. I remember you sent me that text and I was like, damn, that's powerful.
Yeah, like literally, like it's like, and like, you know, like it's like you like being like, oh, like I want to go to bed, but what if they don't want me to go to bed? It's like, well, what if because I know when I want to go to bed, I'd want you to go to bed. So in a similar way, it's like, well, what if that person, if my thought process has been changing, wants to know what my thought process is, and I assume that my thought process would just be so unwelcome, like, hey, you know, you said this thing, I've been thinking, and I think we'd actually still be a good match despite what you said. Like, what if he doesn't want to know that, you know? So it's like so interesting because in our friendship, hearing how you struggle with things, or I'm just like, oh yeah, what a given. I'm just like, huh, like you did like use my own relationship with givens here to like enact some change in my life too. So yeah.
Yeah. And it's like the thing is, what we've had conversations about how it's so easy for maybe like an FE user to say something like just communicate, but I'm learning more and more that that's it's a given for me to assume that it's so easy to just communicate.
Well, like, you can just communicate needing to go to bed too, but is it easy then? No, it's not.
Yeah, we're all bullied by some function.
Yeah, like you're just like, oh no, like I'm just like, oh no, like I have my own original opinions of this statement this person previously said that's not going to go over well. Like I'm just like so like no. But being friends with you has definitely encouraged me to step out of my comfort zone more in a way that actually feels safe and secure, because I can fix my eyes on a greater principle that's not just like obligatory, like you should do this. Is how I'm used to like hearing people, especially FJs, critique me, but I never feel critiqued by you. I feel inspired by you. So yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, and my boundaries are just so much better.
Yeah, you're just like, wait a minute, let me step back for a second and look at this from my point of view. And I'm just like, all right, fine, let me like pay attention to the tribe and think about it more. And okay, fine, maybe the tribe isn't as unfriendly as I thought. Exactly. We are so blind, but we make each other see. So yeah. Anyways, this was lovely. I'm sure that we're gonna have more cool, colorful conversations that will be annotated to be put on our channel. So yeah, thanks so much for talking to you today, Kat.
Bye.
Bye.